In this video, we're going to build on our item system from the last video and actually be able to take and drop items. So you'll see if I say take key here, we pick up the key, and I can type inventory to list out what's in my inventory. And you'll see that when I do that, I have the key. And now I can drop the key as well, and it'll be back in the room. And if I go back to this room, you'll see the key is still there and I can take it again. So we'll have a robust inventory system where you can take and drop things as you want. Let's get started. Alrighty, so in the last video, we added items to our rooms and we're displaying those items whenever a player goes to a room, but we didn't actually have a way for them to take things. So let's first implement the take command at least as much as we can, and then we'll get to implementing a player inventory that'll keep track of what items the player currently has. So first off, we need to actually add a new command, which is great. We haven't done this in a long time. So now instead of go and help, we're going to add one more, which is going to be take. And take is going to need a second word, right? So I'll do return take. We'll add this function in a second. Return take, second word. And so we'll add a take command after go. So I'll do func take and then second word, which will be a string, as we know. This will return a string, as all of these functions do. And here we're going to actually implement taking. So first, similar to our go command, if we don't have a second word, we need to say if second word equals empty string. We can return take what. So return take what. Similar to go where, we say take what. Easy enough. And here now we can do return, I'll just say to do. Okay, so what we need to do here is actually go through all of the items in the current room and see if the item that the player entered lines up. And what we could do is use like the array.find or has function. We're not actually going to do that because we want to do some custom handling as at the same time that we're looping through our array. So what I'm going to do is say for item in current room dot items. So we're going to go through the list of items in the current room. And then what we want to say is do an if statement here. And we want to say if second word. And then important here is we want to make sure that we lowercase this so that we don't have to worry about cases not lining up. So I'll say to lower. So if the second word to lower equals our item.item name, because remember we need the name, and then we're going to do to lower on this as well to make sure they're both lowercase. So if they equal each other, then we need to do some specific things. First, we'll just return here and say found it. Okay, so what we can do just to test is make sure that this is actually working correctly. So if I run our game and I say take, it should say take what? If I say take sandwich, it should say to do because we didn't find it. And if I move this over, you'll see that to do is what happens when we get the end. But if I say take key, and notice up here that key is capitalized in our actual item line, but if I lowercase it, it should pick it up. So we found it. So it is correctly finding items when we type them in. So that's good. Now we just need to actually handle doing something with those items when we find them. So we're not actually going to be able to handle doing something with those items yet because we haven't implemented an inventory. We can't take the item and put it anywhere yet. What we can do is change this text here though. So we know that if we get to the end, we've gone through this for loop, we've iterated through all the items in the room, and we have not found what the player wanted to find. So what we can do is add some text here that we return just to tell the player that. So we can say there is no item like that in this room. Again, kind of a wooden sentence, feel free to change it as needed, but this is just going to tell the player, hey, you entered this item and we couldn't find it here, so sorry about that. And they're going to know that they either have to type something else in or that they just can't, that's not an item that's in the room. Toward that same point, we can change our text here to be something like you take the, and then we'll do a space, and then we'll just concatenate here and say item.item name. And we'll also do to lower on, we don't need to do to lower yet. We'll kind of feel it out. What I should have done actually, if I go to our room manager, is change this key to be lowercase here. And we should just keep with our convention of having everything be lowercase. But so now if I try this out and I say take key, it'll say you take the key, which is that's a much better message there. And if I say take bread, it'll say there's no item like that in this room. So now we've got good and helpful error messages that are going to tell the player either, hey, you did pick this up, or there's no item like that. All right, so that's a good step. And I think now we've got everything we need in our basic take functionality. to start actually adding a player inventory. And so the way we're going to add our player, first, if we go to our command processor, we'll remember that we created this initialize function. And this is where we pass in our starting room. Well, we're going to do a pretty similar thing for our player. So I can say variable player, and again, this will just be null, and we'll require our initialize function to take a player here. And so what we'll do is say self.player equals player. Okay, so this is all well and good, but we don't actually have a player yet. Another thing is we're going to have to actually make sure we pass in a player script here, or a player object, excuse me, when we do command processor.initialize. So I'll say variable player. This is just going to be null, but I'll just pass it in right now so that we've got that. Okay, so this sounds good. What we need to actually do is create our player node. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click on our game node at the top of our scene tree, and I'm going to do I'm just going to hit this plus button here. That's what I meant. And I'm going to create a new node, just a regular node, not a node 2D. I'm going to drag this to the top of our tree so it's easy to find. And I'm just going to call this player. And what I'll do is attach a script to it that will also be called player. And so what I want to do now is within our game script is we're going to add another onReady variable here. And I'm going to say onReady var player. And this is going to be player. Okay, and now we can get rid of this player variable we did on line 25, which is just a placeholder to get rid of the warning. And so now we're going to be, when our game starts, saving our player to a variable and then passing it into our command processor so that it can work with it directly and not have to signal up and down all the time. So this is going to be really nice. All of a sudden, we've wired up a player to our command processor. Now all we need to do is just add the necessary functions to our player. Okay, so if I go to our player script, I'm going to delete all the stuff here. And what I'm going to do is pretty similar to what we did for our rooms. I'm going to say variable inventory. And you could also call this items, but I'm just going to call it inventory because it's specifically indicating that this is a list of items the player is holding, not just items that are in a room. And we'll make this an empty array. Now, eventually, you might want to have some constraints around what the player can hold. Maybe they have a weight limit. Maybe they have a carry limit. You know, they can only have 5 things. You can implement that and decide that on your own. Up until, at this point at least, maybe in the future we'll get this, but I wouldn't count on it. I think we're just going to let the player hold an infinite amount of things. And so what we can do is say pickup item, or whoops, sorry, function pickup item. And then we will pass in an item here. And again, we'll use our item type. And then what we'll do is just say inventory.append item. And so what we're going to be doing is now in our command processor, whenever we say take something, we can say player.pickupItem this item. And we can also remove that item. Remember, we'll need to do both from the room. So now that we have this pickup item function, we can just call it like I just said. So we'll come down to our take function down here. And now instead of just returning this, we will also return this string, but we will say player, since remember, we are saving the player up top, so we have access to him. So we'll say player.takeItem, and then we just have to pass in the item, which is just going to be item. Now, remember, we're adding this to our player's inventory, but it's still going to exist in the room. So we need to actually remove it from the room. And we never actually implemented a function to do that. So we'll come back over to our room now. And right below add item, we will have a similar function, which will be function remove item. And this will be item.item, or we'll type it as item. And within an array, so if I start typing items here and get the autocomplete, you'll find 2 functions that let you get rid of things, erase and remove down at the bottom. Now, if I hit remove, you'll notice that for a parameter, it takes an integer, a position, which is an index. So you're removing the first item or the 10th item. We don't know where item is going to be in our item list. So what we want to do is erase. Now, erase is less quick, it's less optimized than remove, because remove just goes straight to an index. With erase, you have to search through it. So it's not the most efficient function, but our item arrays are going to be like 5 items max, most of the time 1. So this is totally fine. No big deal here. The only other thing to note too, though, is that you've got to handle the case where the variant you pass in, the value, is not actually in your array. Right now, we can do the dumb thing and just assume that we're always going to call this where we're passing in an item that's in our array. It'd be good to add some error handling to that. But all that to say, this is fine for right now to remove an item, but you're probably going to want some better error handling in case this item does not exist first. Anyway, so now that we've done that, we can come back to our command processor and not only take the item, but first we can do room or current room dot remove item. So whenever we take an item, we're going to remove it from the room and then take that item. Okay, and I'm noticing before we start this that I've actually called this function take item right here, but in the player we called it pickup item. I think because take is the actual keyword we're using, we'll stick to that. So let me go back to our player and change this to be take item, just to make it a little bit more consistent. Okay, now if I run this, we should see if I type take key, we take the key. But now watch what happens if I try and take the key again. There's no item like that in this room, which is exactly what we want. And so if I go east and then go back west, we should see no items to pick up. So that's how we know we're actually picking up an item and it's getting removed from the room. Now we don't have a way to output to the player what items they have in their inventory. So we need to add something like that so that you can check what you currently have. But this is really cool. All of a sudden we can pick up items. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a pretty important feature to have in any kind of a text adventure. So we are definitely, we've made some progress, guys. This is video 10, 11 now. And we have a game with a lot of functionality. So we've been moving along, and I hope you're getting excited, trying to find some ways that you can customize and make the game your own, because we're going to be adding some other cool stuff as part of this series. So anyway, I would love to see the creations you guys make and take with this, but let's add a inventory command now. So if I go back to our command processor, we can add another command. And I hope you're realizing too how easy it is to add new commands because of how we structured our command processor. Now, what I want for the inventory command is just to output the current player inventory. So maybe there's a better word for this. Maybe you want to have like a list command, for example. I'm not totally sure. You can name this command whatever you want. I'll just stick to inventory because I think it implies list out the player's inventory. So I'll say return inventory. We won't need a second word here because we are just listing it out. It doesn't matter. What I can do then, we need to make this inventory function. So I'll come down here, I'll say function inventory. This will take no parameters. It'll return a string. And here we can just return, for now we'll return an empty string. But what we want to do eventually is build up an array of the items that the player is carrying. And so in order to do that, I think we can do something pretty similar to how we did our item array for our rooms. We can just kind of do this for the player. And so let me copy our getItemDescription function in our room and bring this to our player. And remember, because our player is the place that we're keeping track of the player's inventory, this is also where we want to build up our inventory string. So I'm going to say function getInventory. And for now, this will just be a function that returns a string. It won't return the actual item. So I guess getInventoryDescription maybe, since it's just getting or getInventoryList. You can call it whatever you want, but I'll just call it getInventoryList for now because we're getting the item names, not the actual items itself. Let me just copy this code in. And so we'll say if inventory.size is 0. So if we're not holding anything, I'll say you don't currently have anything. And then if we are holding something, we can say for item in inventory, and we'll do item string dot item, and the code's all the same. We're just getting it from our inventory now. And then we'll just return inventory. I'll say inventory instead of items just to differentiate, and then item string. And so we were able to pretty much adapt the function we used in our room almost exactly and just rename a few things and have slightly different text. So now in our command processor, I can just return player.getInventoryList. Let me just make sure that's what I called it. GetInventoryList, getInventoryList. Amazing. So now if I run our game and I say inventory, you don't currently have anything. And I say take key, and now I say inventory, it says inventory key. Amazing. So now we are able to list out to the player what they have in their inventory, which is a huge, huge bonus. We've already started implementing some great functionality here. Another thing I want to do also is I wish there was an easier way for us to automatically add new commands to help, but for now we'll just add it on our own. So remember, we had this help string here. We probably want to make sure we're updating this as we go. So I'll add our new commands that we added. So take, and then item, and then we'll say inventory and help. And again, maybe we'll find a better way to do this, but we're adding commands so infrequently now that I think hard coding this into a string and just trying to keep up with it is totally fine for now. It's not an ideal situation if you're actually making a bigger game, but for our case, it'll work. Okay, so we've added an inventory, we've added the ability to take items. Let's do one more thing to make our inventory kind of fleshed out and able to actually be useful, and that's to drop an item. So since I'm already at our help text here, let me just add our next command, which would be drop, and then item, just like take. And let's add a drop command. So I'll add it right after take here. I'll say function drop, and we will take a second word here, right? Because you have to pass in which item you want to drop. This will return a string, and we'll just do return empty string now to get rid of the error. Let's add our drop up in our first word match list here. So I'll say drop, and then return drop, second word, just like we've done before. And now we can actually drop. And so you can probably already think about how we're going to implement this. We're just going to get the player's inventory list and then loop through it and see if the item that we want to drop actually exists in the inventory. So in a similar vein as our take, I can just really copy and paste this first line where we're just going to check and make sure we have a second word. So we can say if second word is empty, we can say drop what. Again, this is another example of something that might be nice just to have a built-in function or whatever to take care of us for instead of having to always having to add this line. But for now, again, totally fine. We've only got a few commands. And now what we want to do is say for item in player.inventory. So we're going to loop through the player's inventory, and we're going to do pretty much the same thing that we were doing up here with our take, where we're checking if the second word to lower is equal to the item.toLower. So I'll actually just copy this line, and we'll use it here because it's going to work out just as is because we're looking at our second word. That's the item the player typed. And then the item variable is the current item in the player's inventory we're looking at. And so what we want to do is if these two match, we're going to do the reverse of what we're doing up here. So we need to say current room dot add item. And remember a couple of videos ago when we made this add item command, we talked about how we could use the same function for both creating items at the start of the game and for adding them later on. And now we're seeing the fruit of that. So it's super easy to add an item to a room because we've already got this function that works. We can just say to add this item. And then what we need to do is say player dot drop item. And we don't actually have this drop item function implemented. So make a note of that. We need to go back and add that, which we will in just a second. But again, just to make sure that we keep it the same as our take, we can copy the return statement we have here and say you drop the item name. So it's going to be exactly the mirror of what we're doing up above. Instead of the current room losing the item and the player taking it, now the player is going to lose the item and the current room will take it. So they're dropping it in the specific room they're in, and our text is going to reflect that. So super easy, really good, really easy to do. And here we can just say you don't have that item. Because remember, we're going to get to this case down here if the player tries to drop an item that they don't have. So now that we've added drop, let's run our game. First, let's type help, and we should see that our help text looks good. And it does. You can go to a location, take an item, drop an item, type inventory, type help, which is great. So if I type drop, we should see drop what? If I say drop bread, it'll say you don't have that item. If I type inventory, don't currently have anything. But now if I say take key, we take the key. And if I type inventory, we have the key. And now if I say drop key, we'll see that we get an error because do you remember a second ago when I said we needed to still implement drop item? Well, I forgot and we didn't actually implement it. So let's pause our game or stop it and let's actually implement this function. It's crazy how that works. I'm glad I said that to you all because I totally forgot. It was just classic, happens. So if we go into our player script here, similar to how we have a take item function, we can say function drop item. And again, we'll take an item, which is of type item. And this is going to be pretty much the same thing we did with our room here, where we made sure that we were using erase rather than remove. Because again, we're trying to remove something by its value, not by its index. And so we can do the same thing here. Instead of items though, we'll say inventory. So inventory.erase, and then we'll pass in item. And simple as that. And again, remember, we should probably do some checking here to make sure the player actually has that item. Because now look what happens. If I run our game, and I have nothing in my inventory now, right? But if I try and say drop bread, it'll say, oh, you don't have the item. So it's good that we're handling it in our command processor, but if we weren't, we'd get some weird functionality going on here. So anyway, all that to say, it might be good to add some error handling to your take and drop here. But if I run it and see it happen, I can say take key, and then I can say drop key. So we drop the key. And now if I try and take the key again, it'll work because the key is in that room. So let me drop the key. Let me go to the next room. No items here. And if I go back, we should see the key there again. Cool. So wow, everyone, look at that. I mean, we now have a robust inventory system. We've got a player that keeps track of their inventory, and you can take and drop items at your leisure. And if you wanted to add a weight system or a max carry system and make that kind of part of the puzzle of your game, so maybe you can only carry certain items at a certain time, you've implemented that entirely. All you would have to do is just add a weight variable in your player and make sure that you weren't picking something up that went above that. You'd have to add a weight to your items as well and just kind of go through your inventory and make sure you were lower than your max weight. So we're not going to do that yet, at least, but just wanted to say that so that if that's something you want to do in your own game, it's really easy to do. I mean, we're pretty much there. Anyway, now we've got our inventory system and it's all working. This is really cool. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, a like and subscribe are always appreciated. We'd love to have you in our Discord server. Link to that is in the description below. Ask any questions, get any help, and share your progress there. We'd love to see it. If you do find my work helpful, donating me a coffee and buying me a coffee helps me continue to make great videos. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Appreciate the support. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.